morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest.
Welcome back, fellow book lovers. As we set off on today's side quest, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Yes, sir, Jonathan. We are in episode 102, part 2 of Underlord by Wight.
That is correct. Little housekeeping before we start. I hope you guys enjoyed the special episodes. Please comment and reach out to let us know if you like them, you don't like them. If you don't like them, we won't do them. They're actually way more work than these normal episodes, but we have gotten some comments, like people asking, and we said this in the other episode, of like, what's it take to make a podcast? How do I do one? So we wanted to make it for those people. But if the majority of you are not on board, then like, let us know and we will simply save the time.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of work, extra work, to make an episode like that. And one might think the opposite, where you're preparing for a book episode, you're doing the research, I'm doing the research, you're doing your own thing. We get together and have calls before the episodes to make sure the outline, the template, and the framework is all in sync with what each of us want to say, so it flows well. That takes a lot less time than sitting down and writing out a storyboard or a script and a template for reflections on 99 episodes, or what we did in episode 100, where we talked about some of our favorite moments and discussed the journey from a different perspective. That takes weeks and weeks of preparation, where an episode like this takes a few days. And if it takes more for me to do the research of the author and the book itself and some of the other elements that we have brought into the new template, that's spread out over a long period of time as we're reading the book, so it doesn't feel as a heavy overlift. So to echo what you said, Jonathan, yeah, the audience doesn't need us pontificating on favorite books and podcast best practices, so I'm happy to stop.
Yeah, me too. Anyway, we've got the second episode of Cradle right now for Underlord, and then next episode, we're super excited to have the largest guest episode we've ever had. You'll see some returning guests and a surprise guest, which will be cool. And then after that, the 2025 schedule continues going. So we're looking forward to that. There is like one discrepancy on which book we're doing after this, so we'll let you show up for the surprise. Anyway, let's dive right in, Slava.
The Dread Gods are awakening, prompting the monarchs of Cradle to hold the Uncrowned Tournament to cultivate new sacred artists. The Akura clan opens night with Wheel Valley to their vassal states, the Black Flame Empire and the Sation Kingdom. Akura Charity will select the top 3 underlords from each kingdom, with a focus on targeting Lyndon due to his role in Akura Harmony's death. In Night Wheel Valley, Sation Kiro and his protector Miera confront Lyndon, who eventually becomes an underlord. Yeren also manages to advance to Underlord amidst the chaos of a surprise attack by the Sation Kingdom on the Black Flame Empire. During this turmoil, Lyndon kills Prince Kiro, prompting Prince Daijai to vow revenge, only to be defeated by Mercy. Afterward, Charity announces the vassal state team for the tournament. Yeren, Athen, and Narusea will compete, while Lyndon will participate on the Black Flame team to repay his debt. Meanwhile, in Sacred Valley, Wei Shi Kelsa, hiding from hunters, encounters Orthos. And of course, the Abion continue their struggles against the Roshir as they fight to protect their worlds.
It's an exciting time over in the world of Cradle, tell you that much.
That it is, yeah.
I also just love the moment of Orthos showing up
Oh, hell yeah.
for Kelsa. To me, it was a very emotional, moving moment, because you're like, he's leaving, I don't know where he's going. And then you're like, oh, we're going back to Sacred Valley. And then suddenly he shows up and you're like, oh my gosh. It's such a great reveal.
It is. Once you read that Orthos is leaving, you think he's going somewhere else, and he'll come back and book whatever. And at the end of it, he's like, oh, wait, he went on a quest, but it was a very special side quest that he went on.
Exactly. Yeah. It moved me emotionally, I'll tell you that much.
And who do we have to thank for these emotional movements?
Oh, just Mr. Will Wight, best-selling American fantasy author known for his Cradle series. He started his authorship with the House of Blades trilogy, which is fun and unique. There's these, it's called the Traveler's Gate trilogy, but House of Blades is the first book, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's these fortresses, basically. Each fortress has sort of a different theme, and the one that you follow with the main character is you can't get to the next room unless you're powerful enough to get to the next room. There's also a time limit where the entity of the house, I haven't read this in a while, so if I'm messing this up, drop it in the comments and correct me. But the entity that runs the house will kill the person who is there trying to go through the different rooms if they can't do it in time. That also is where the character gets trained because they need to overcome these rooms. The entity that runs the house has a doll collection, and the dolls speak, even though they don't move. So it's like telepathy. But each of the dolls, when you carry them, has a different power that you get to use. It's super unique.
If Annabelle knew karate.
I don't get the reference.
Annabelle is a horror movie about a possessed doll. It's a silly joke.
Got it. Well,
if you know, you know.
Apparently I don't. Anyway, worth a read. I think we'll get to it at some point. That's his first debut authorship piece, which is really fun. But Wight is often celebrated for his dynamic characters, fast-paced storytelling, and immersive world building. He's currently working on a new series called Horizon. It's in the Cradle universe, and also House of Blades is technically in the Cradle universe. There's no overlaps at the moment, besides some bloopers from book 1 of Horizon, where we see a character from Cradle, which was kind of fun. He's good at forcing his characters to go through strong emotional arcs across the books that I've read. He's worth a read. Yeah. If you are like, I'm not sure about this, give him a rundown. Give him a rundown. So, Slava, let's move into something we didn't talk about last time. As the audience knows, we're trying to create education and entertainment in this podcast. And we didn't cover last time characters and the types of characters that they are in the story. Would you give us just a quick overview before we jump into this? For any new listeners, what are the types of characters? What are we going to be discussing here for a little bit?
Yeah.
So that they have a little context.
There are probably 6. You can parse this out a few different ways. For our context, there will be 6. So there's the hero or the protagonist. There's the mentor. There is the Deuteragonist, if I'm pronouncing that right, but the second protagonist, kind of the Robin to the Batman, if you will. The villain, of course. There's usually allies for the protagonist. And then there's the anti-hero in a lot of books. Sometimes the book just focuses on an anti-hero and he or she is the protagonist. But for us, we have all 6.
There's more as well.
Yeah.
I realized I put you on the spot there. There's the foil. We talked about this during Name of the Wind. So there's a bunch of different character types, archetypes, if you will. And each author uses them differently. Some of the things that we subconsciously actually really love as readers is watching these characters play out these different archetypes because the flavor of the archetype is unique to the author and the story and the world. Yeah, we want to just take a minute and look at the different types that Wight uses in Cradle.
Yeah, so the villain will be the Kura faction and their representatives. They are always a looming threat. They're not outright villains, but they serve as a powerful, potentially hostile force within the Empire.
Right.
Their influence in the world, they add political intrigue that foreshadows danger. What else? I could say that there's conflicts that Lyndon and his friends face directly from Akura or from the efforts of Akura in world, the consequences of them, the consequences of those efforts. Their dominance kind of sets the standard that pushes the protagonist on their journey.
Yeah. It's interesting to have a villain that's not a villain, because oftentimes I think we're used to, like, what's a common example? Sonic. If you know about Sonic the Hedgehog, Dr. Robotnik is the villain, and he's a villain every episode. Or Looney Tunes, right? Wile E. Coyote is always trying to get Roadrunner, and it's like, oh well, he's the villain. We understand that. What's the well? I want to use a third one. So Bugs Bunny is always running away from. Do you remember the guy's name? The little
Elmer
cartoon guy?
Fudd.
Elmer Fudd. That's right. We have these quote unquote villains, but the thing is, they don't have to be super evil in the sense that they are, demon possessed or whatever with like some of the horror books we read, because they could even be something that's more amorphous, similar to, what's that blue alien world?
Avatar.
Avatar. Yeah, the villain there is actually just the military complex. So it's like not even a person, it's just a thing. And that's similar to what we have here with the Akura clan, where it's this big force, not necessarily a specific being. Sometimes authors use that. I don't know if you want to share any examples from some of the horror books that we've looked at or other thoughts you have on that.
Well, I don't think the horror books we read have an entity or a force as a villain, right? Most of them are pretty straightforward. Pennywise is the villain.
Mm-hmm.
A head full of ghosts is the parents, really kind of messing things
That
up.
book was so frustrating.
Yeah. In in the city, you kind of have the government entity. So that's a one, but that's not a horror book. That's a speculative
Yeah, that's
fiction.
fair. I mean, it didn't need to be horror specific. I just meant like other stuff we've read.
Right. So it'd be City in the City that comes to mind right away because you have the Breach. They're kind of
Yes, the Breach.
They're kind of the villain, but not individual in the Breach is this evil, demon-possessed, totally focused on destruction. The entity itself, the organization that serves as the villain in that story. But that's the only book that comes to mind out of what we've read that has a similar villain, meaning that it's not a person wholly committed to destruction or evil deeds, but serves as the villain in the arc of the story.
Yeah. One thing that I think we want to touch on is there's actually a few villains in this book. So we have Akura, that's like more of a macro. And then we also have the Dread Gods, which are not at the forefront as a villain at the moment, but they are a part of this, right? We've seen in a couple of books prior to this, like, oh, the Dread Gods are looming. One of Lyndon's kind of main goals is to stop the Dread Gods closest to Sacred Valley from destroying it because he got a vision from Serial. If you remember book one, you can have competing villains, if you will. The thing is, like, books are only so long, and you have to give them screen time, to use a film term. And if you don't give them screen time, they kind of are out of sight, out of mind. For this book, because the Akura family, specifically I'm thinking about Charity, the sage, she's kind of got a vendetta against Lyndon in particular to put his feet to the fire, if you will, because he killed one of her family members. She just wants to see if he can repay his debt that he doesn't know he has. So,
right.
Anyway, that's a little bit about villains where it's both simple and complex, I think.
And in a book like this, you have other micro villains, if we're going to use macro and micro terms like you just did.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who takes Lyndon's arm, I forget his name.
Jai Chen. No.
Yes.
Jai Chen? Yeah.
I think it's Jai Chen. That's someone that falls under the villain category that Lyndon encounters while the bigger things are happening too. So the Dread Gods and the Abaddon and the Kura faction, all of them are doing their thing. And we're focused on Kura as the villain of the story specifically. But there's these micro villains too. And the school that Lyndon goes to and has to climb the mountain, like their people are complete
Yeah, they were villains as well.
villains towards Lyndon. His family, I wouldn't necessarily call them villains, but his Sacred Valley life, the people who run his clan, they're villain-ish because they're just god-awful people.
I'd put his family into the antagonist role, not necessarily villain.
That's fair. That's a good way of looking at it.
So a quick definition for folks. Villains are often evil with malicious intent, whereas antagonists are simply helping to create resistance against the protagonist. Is that clear enough?
No, that's very clear. It's a good way of dissecting it.
Okay. Anyway, continue on with your thought there. Just wanted to insert that to help us get a little clarity in the series that we're addressing.
I think that covers it. But it's not all about villains and antagonists. We also have mentors and allies. And I think the most clear ally that we see in the book is Mercy. She's kind-hearted. She's a skilled sacred artist from the Kura clan. So that's kind of, a little bit of a unexpected, what's the word I'm looking for? Not irony, but complexity, adds complexity to the story. So she's from the Akura faction, which we just said is a villain, but she as an individual acts like an ally to our hero and I was going to say Yasna and
Wow.
Yeren.
Nice. Very nice.
That's what happens when you read two books at the same time.
It's true.
She becomes a friend, an ally to Lyndon and Yeren, but her personality contrasts with the fierce training and competition around her because she even annoys Yeren at some moments because she's so cheery and bubbly, which is fun. And her compassion, her powerful background, specifically, she's from the Kura faction, which is a pretty powerful faction in this world, brings a softer dynamic to the group. And then it gives Yeren and Lyndon access to knowledge that they might not have because Ethan, he's off doing his own thing in this moment. So Mercy's here kind of filling in the gap. And her alliance with the protagonist integrates them into the world of the Kura clan, so they have access to them. And then there's where you get a more flavorful story, right? There's layers to it. It's not black and white. And so that makes this kind of story such a fun read. It's more realistic. It's more believable. There's even people maybe on the Kura clan that you can identify with and say, hey, I've been this way, or I understand why the Kura clan is the way that they are because, I watched this movie, I read this book, I've taken this class, I've lived this event in my life. You can immerse yourself in the story and you find these little gems that you identify with or help you think about the world in a different way. I think this particular character, Mercy, and what I just described as her being an ally, helps Will create that kind of a world and tell a story where people, to your point, want more. They want book 13 and 14 and maybe even, 22.
It's true. We want more. We haven't come up with a slogan to chant yet, but we want more. So
4 more books?
What do we want? 4 more books. When do we want them? Today. Something. We'll figure out a chant there. You and me. We'll just chant it, and people will go, well, "What are you guys talking about?" And we'll go, "Read the book."
We can get the audience to do it. What would be a chant that you would create if you were to march down the streets of your city demanding that Will Wight write more books in the Cradle series? I want that in the comments.
That's good. That's a good question. But keeping this moving forward, I was going to mention that it's fun to have one of the allies be from the family of the villains we were talking about. It adds a unique contrast because you wonder, is she on your side? Is she not? It's mixed with Mercy's personality that is so bubbly and so friendly. I think we've seen in other stories, or at least I have, that people who come from highly privileged status lives and they were raised, silver spoon basically, don't really get to have a lot of friends, for better or worse. That creates a dynamic where she wants to have friends. Everyone should have friends. It's a good thing to have friends because she was so, her status was the ruling class. She didn't really get to, right? So it's a more unique dynamic in literature, I think, unless I'm misremembering that this is pretty common. I don't think it is.
I'm thinking of Romeo and Juliet, which is completely different, but there's a principle of play that's kind of the same where 2 kids from opposing factions, opposing families find something in common. I think Mercy finds something in common. There's an attachment that she has to Lyndon and Yeren and themselves as persons and their story and what they're going through. She's part of this world. She's part of what's going on, the Dread Gods and the Abaddon and everything that is going on in this world, the overarching story of it. She's part of it, and she finds something to latch onto in Lyndon and Yeren. And there is plenty of movies that we watched that tell a similar story. I think the movie is called Night Watch. It's a movie about a family of cops. Joaquin Phoenix, he's not necessarily a full-out criminal, but he's on the side of the villains, on the side of the criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not analogous to the story, but he's kind of on the outside, and he has friends around him that he is attached to, even though they're in opposition to his family. And again, it goes back to the dynamic, layered, unique way of telling a story,
Mm-hmm.
where Joaquin Phoenix is not just a scumbag who has left his cop family and is just an outright, low-life criminal. There's a unique, layered character in him. So again, not analogous, but
It's close.
the principle of telling those kind of stories where you get more robust characters, you get characters that are not two-dimensional. That's a realistic story, right? A believable story. We've touched upon this a few times in our discussions about books. What makes a story believable? And I think stuff like this does. And because Mercy has favor with her family too, I think the Akura clan would trust her if she backed up Lyndon and Yeren. Now, whether or not they would take her suggestions and go with it right away, no. But she is in both worlds, and it creates tension with her family a little bit, and it gives Lyndon and Yeren some reprieve on the other end of it, and it has the access that they have now to the knowledge she has. So it's this multicolored kaleidoscope of a story that is created, whether it's the movies I just mentioned or this book specifically.
Well, so I want to challenge one thing. I don't feel like they get a lot of benefit from the Akura family from Mercy's position there until the end of this book, where Mercy's like, hey, mother, I will, concede. I'll come back to the family, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Then she's like, okay. And then her mom's about to leave, and she's like, wait, are you not going to take me? And she's like, I thought you had unfinished business here. And she's like, okay, all right, I get to go solve the problem for my friends real quick, even though I've committed to leaving them. Until that happens, I don't really feel like they get the benefit. And maybe I'm being nitpicky, and if I am, just throw it back at me. But I don't think that Mercy's help really starts to flourish. It certainly is a help that she gets to know about Nightwheel Valley and where to go for things. That's good. The actual dynamic with the family itself, I don't think takes place until later at the end of this book, in my opinion.
There's nothing to throw back. I think it's just looking at the same thing from a different perspective, right? The benefits that they get, in my opinion, is the knowledge that Mercy has, which I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're friends with a person in the Akura family who's technically the villain here, because they're friends with her, that's some protection that they receive, whether they realize it or not. And Mercy, from my reading,
Mm-hmm.
and you read the whole thing, I only read up to this book. From my reading of Mercy, she seems genuine in her love for Lyndon and Yeren.
Oh, she's genuine. Sorry, maybe I misunderstood. I was talking about. Sorry, keep going.
So there is this buffer, for lack of a better term, that Yeren and Lyndon have because of Mercy's allegiance to them or her respect and love for them. She won't be just like, well, mom says to kill them both.
Right.
She will try to protect them. And the other benefit that I mentioned before is whatever she knows is probably greater, at least what Lyndon knows, right? Yeren might know more stuff, but their mentor is not with them right now. And Mercy's there not only helping them fight, she's on their side, she's protecting them. And because she has the knowledge that the Kura faction has, she can provide insight during a battle, during a brainstorming session that they have to figure out, okay, well, what are we doing next?
Brainstorming session.
Like they're sitting down, they're figuring out their next steps. They have the added benefit of having somebody like Mercy from the Kura faction with them.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's shift over to the anti-hero discussion for just a couple minutes, because he's one of my favorite characters. And then, if you want to, we can talk about the Deuteragonist, or we can move on. But the anti-hero in Cradle would be Orthos. Orthos is from the Black Dragon family, fully cynical. I think I've referenced him as a curmudgeon before. He's sometimes begrudging with his
Companionship?
companionship works. I was going to say soul binding. This is like not a good sentence. What is it? His soul contract. That's the word that I wanted. He's a little begrudging with Lyndon and his soul contract sometimes, but he is deeply loyal and has a lot of wisdom because he's so old for Lyndon in the midst of Lyndon's growth. And so even though he's not necessarily the mentor the way that Ethan's the mentor, Orthos offers guidance to Lyndon as well as pushes him back. And he has all these great one-liners like, a dragon does this, a dragon does that, et cetera, which is fun. It offers a little comic relief, a little bit of realism, and also keeps Lyndon in line when he's being skittish and not growing into his fullest self in the progression fantasy theme that he lives in. And so I really love Orthos and his anti-hero tendencies. Oh, I just realized I didn't define anti-hero. Would you mind doing that real quick, Slava? I went on just like this little tirade, but I should have defined it before I started talking about it.
Yeah, I would love to. I want to bring to attention that you also referenced Stormlight Archives while trying to describe the soul contract. You said soul binding, which I think you are
surge binding.
Yeah, that was a thing.
There's a lot of stuff in my head, Slava. A lot of fantasy world building. That's a scientific term for stuff.
So an anti-hero is a central character in a story that lacks conventional heroic attributes. The one I would say works here is idealism. He's not really an idealistic dragon, right?
True. Very true. Orthos, my go-to little turtle.
Good old Orthos. I think we can talk about the Deuteragonist.
Deuteragonist?
Yeah, we can talk about the Deuteragonist just briefly because I mentioned like Robin and Batman. Upon reflection, maybe that's a weak analogy. How would you see Yeren fulfilling that role? Because she's skilled, she's strong, she's even stronger than Lyndon. Without her, Lyndon wouldn't get to where he is. So it's not really a Batman and Robin situation. But she is a fellow protagonist. Her goals align with Lyndon's. She has her own personal struggles, especially regarding her master's legacy, and her personal journey in relationship with Lyndon add more to the plot.
Yeah.
She's fierce and independent on her own, but she also balances Lyndon's ambition and keeping him grounded like Orthos does, but also pushing him like Orthos does. And her loyalty is part of the strength of this group's dynamic. So maybe you can correct my Batman and Robin analogy and give a better one.
Well, there's not a lot of stories that come to mind, but the first one, trying to find a better analogy or a better comparison, would be Jean from The Lies of Locke Lamora, where Locke is the main character, but Jean is the second main character, and we see this more in book 2 than book 1 because book 1 has a lot more characters in it. But book 2, because a bunch of those characters passed away or left, Jean is still around. And so he, to me, would be a Deuteragonist in comparison to, Lyndon and Yeren, because we meet Yeren in book 1. Wight starts this off where their journey begins together. I would even say that Sam is almost a Deuteragonist for Frodo because he also starts right after Frodo starts to go on the journey in Lord of the Rings.
I like the Locke and John comparison much better than
I-
Batman and Robin.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were just referencing the fact that you really liked the Liza Lamora, but that works too.
I really like the Liza Lamora. On some of my social media platforms, my bio or about line says "nice bird asshole."
There it is. I was gonna say, let me guess. I don't have to because I knew that that's what it would be. Slava still sometimes will just send me that in a text. No, like we haven't talked all day or whatever, and he'll just boom, nice bird asshole. Cool. I don't know what we're talking about, but that sounds great.
That's a little peek into how my broken humor works.
Yes, it is. We've been sitting on characters and types for a minute, but we hope that opens up and lets you start thinking about the different types of heroes that you've seen in other stories that you like and how that affects the plot and the character development.
So what you're saying, Jonathan, is we should take a little side quest.
I think that that's a great idea.
Okay, well, I got an idea for a side quest. So last episode, we came up with our own path and what we would practice.
Mm-hmm.
This episode, I want to talk about what would be the weaknesses of our sacred art path. Yeah.
Sticking with the progression fantasy. All right.
Ah, yes.
Okay. Have you already given this some thought, or do you need a second as well?
I've given it some thought. I'll go first, and then I'll let you jump in afterwards.
Okay. All right.
So last episode, we talked that I would be a practitioner of the Forger's Flame. I didn't say what my path would be. It would be the path of the mind's eye. And this would be a journey focused on insight. Practitioners of this path seek to understand the world around them because, I'm a researcher and all that stuff, so that fits in. On some level, it goes beyond just sight. These guys hone in their senses to perceive hidden layers, anticipate outcomes, and connect seemingly unrelated elements. Again, goes back to my strategy because I'm in digital strategy. That's what I've been doing, marketing and digital strategy. And through rigorous mental discipline, cultivators of this path learn to analyze, predict, and even influence their environment by turning clarity of mind into practical strategic power. It's like reading my job description. So I practice the Forger's Flame. That's what we talked about last episode. And this is an inner spark that allows them to turn perception into creation. But what my weakness would be, at least I think my weakness would be, is sensory overload. That would be a vulnerability. Despite the adaptness at reading the surroundings, a major risk I see in this path is where there's too much sensory input can cloud or distort perception. So against opponents who use this technique, the flood of senses like biting light, disorienting sounds, conflicting auras, mind's eye practitioners, my fellow practitioners may struggle to focus and this is true in my life, as their sharpened perception makes them more susceptible to distraction. As great as a researcher as I am very much easily distracted, which is not good in a fight with, the Kura clan.
Well, not only that, I was thinking about the path of the White Fox, where their whole shtick is illusions. That might be an issue for you.
Yep, because then you get lost in your own illusion, or you're so busy building illusions that you don't see a sword coming at your throat.
So let's remember this conversation for, I want to say it's book 10, because I want to come back to this. So definitely feel free to remind me, guys, in the comments as we get to book 10. Maybe might be 9. I can't remember. Yeah, remind me when these are coming up. That was enough time for me to think a little bit. My path from last episode was the path of the ever-expanding horizon, which focuses on growth, adaptability, and vision, and the drive and desire to surpass limitations, seek new knowledge, refine themselves continually. Also highly strategic, see opportunities in any situation. The people in this path are known for their resilience and innovation. So I figured I'd have no weaknesses, right? Because that's how you do that. That strategy is meant to help you prevent and de-risk things. However, a little similar to what you said, Slava, because of my dependence on insight and awareness, and like seeing seeing opportunities and sensing threats through one of my techniques of insightful gaze. If an opponent could obscure or misdirect me with illusions at a high level, it could be a serious threat to me. The other thing that I thought of was actually two things. So the first thing is, if I have an opponent that is just extremely strong with direct attacks or immense durability, that would be difficult for me because those are not my strengths. My strengths are playing to, similar to Lyndon, like using what I have and adapting, as opposed to like doing brute force strength. Someone who's brute force strength like a Yeren, I would have trouble with probably because she's so fast and strong. And then the other piece that I thought about was one of the techniques I mentioned, I think, was Resonance Pulse or Brand of Influence, where I rely heavily on affecting others through influence. But the vulnerability there for me would be facing opponents who have a strong mental fortitude. I've actually seen this in my day-to-day life where sometimes when I'm trying to influence someone who's just so strong-willed and set in their ways, it's actually quite difficult to influence them toward the things that you're desiring. That actually is a big vulnerability because sometimes you have to convince your stakeholders that they should go a direction, and they're like, I'm not going to do that. And you go, well, these will be the consequences. And they're like, I don't believe in consequences. Okay,
Yep.
well, that's great. And then, time goes on, you did what they said, and they're like, why did this happen? And, well, I told you that there are risks and consequences, like, but I don't believe in consequences. This is your fault. Okay, well, but we don't have to talk about my day-to-day work.
Correct. That is pretty spot on in how our day-to-day jobs play out.
So much. So much.
Well, what do you say we talk about some literary devices? We touched upon them last episode, kind of sporadically, I think, and we knocked some of them out without even really thinking about it or planning. Like, I think the internal monologues and the struggles that Yeren faces and Lyndon faces, we talked about that. So we covered some literary devices. But what are some that stood out? There's foreshadowing, symbolism, irony, flashbacks, metaphors, all those good things. Why don't you give us dealer's choice? You're the dealer right now. Give us two or three to unpack from the story.
Well, the first one that to me kind of sticks out is this plot line of Charity trying to take revenge on Lyndon by influencing the Seishan clan to go after him a little bit. She didn't directly say that. And then Lyndon having to also level up at the moment. Charity being able to benefit if he survives and if he dies, which feels like a juxtaposing idea for Lyndon if we're following just him, his survival and trying to save Sacred Valley and like the stuff that he's doing. It's an antithesis because she wants to take revenge on him, but inevitably it just makes him stronger, which then she can use. But I think she also would have been very satisfied if he died. At least that's my take, based on the way that she's acting, both with the other clans she empowers, even at the end where she is going to put some pressure on him when she recruits him to the team, the Akura team, to represent them in the Uncrowned King tournament. So it's kind of a self-juxtaposed place to be, in my opinion, with Charity herself putting a lot of pressure on Lyndon, but that inevitably making him stronger.
That seems like something that Lyndon faces from other folks too. That's a very specific example.
Yeah.
And, for the antithesis, but there's constantly pressures that Lyndon faces that force him to work outside his comfort zone, to not just sit here and go, well, I have what I have and I'm going to do my best with what I have. But he has this drive and desire to become better and stronger to save his clan. It's one of the other forces that is placed upon Lyndon by Wight that helps him understand his world better, grow, mature. Maybe he lives to her detriment, but what she does actually helps him advance.
I want to pause for a second before I pick another one of these. How far do you think Lyndon gets to go?
Oh, that's a good question. If I'm to believe that Ethan wants to go to the end of the sacred arts, and if Lyndon's along for the ride, and he's going to be taken on this journey of advancement, I don't see any issues of him becoming a monarch.
Okay.
But right now he's Underlord. And there's only a few levels above him, right?
It's Underlord, Overlord, Archlord, and then I can't remember the next ones.
Okay,
It
so
does-
there's more.
There's more. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe he gets to one of those. That's why you want more, because there's more for Lyndon to do. Because if he reaches Monarch, well, right, he's the King Pooba right at that moment.
The King Pooba.
It's another Sacred Art path.
Yeah. Okay.
I definitely think he's going to go through 2 or 3 more advancements. But I don't think my guess of him becoming a Monarch is far-fetched. I think he can get to it, because we have 6 more books, and he's advanced really quickly, twice in some books.
Do you think that he advances too quickly?
No, I think the nature of the story, the nature of the book, the genre, his advancement makes sense for the genre.
Yeah, fair enough. I also did a quick correction for myself. So it is Underlord, Overlord, Archlord, and then it is sort of Monarch. However, there are 2 sidestep or like side tier categories as well. There's Sage and Herald. We've seen Sages. We haven't really seen Heralds yet, from what I recall. You can be a Sage but not be a Monarch, and you can be a Monarch and not be a Sage. It's kind of like one of the 3, sort of. That's also like not a good explanation either.
Okay.
I think Dross says it really well at the beginning of this book somewhere. He's like, when Lyndon is trying to figure out how to create Soulfire and become Underlord and whatever, and Dross is like, oh, I remember all the details, but let's just listen to Athan and figure out what he says to make sure he says it right. And then Lyndon's like, that's kind of weird. And then Dross says something like, the rest of figuring out the sacred arts is very weird, which I think is just Wight's kind of kitschy, like elbow jab in the ribs, like, it's not going to make sense, but it will make sense.
Kind of like what Jasnah tells Shallan in Words of Radiance when she's talking about Shadesmar, and Jasnah is explaining what she knows about the realm. Shallan's response was, I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm paraphrasing. How am I supposed to understand any of it? And Jasnah says, you're not. I've studied this for 6 years, and I barely know anything about it, so it'll take some time for you to understand what Shadesmar is and how we access it and what it means that we have this world that's around us, but not really perceptible to, the basic senses. Anyway, that's me going into a different
different book.
That's
yes,
me
a
hopping.
Different world.
That's me hopping worlds.
A little world hopper over there.
Yeah, look at me.
I'd say the second thing that comes to mind initially is kind of the irony of where Lyndon is at versus where he's been. Like, the book starts with him as an unsouled, which is a person with no path, no power, no future. He is basically the cripple in his family and his tribe, and he's a joke because he keeps getting older and can't fight 6-year-olds, and he's like 16 because they're more powerful than he is, mixed with, the irony and the contrast of, okay, he's about to become Underlord. Now he would just have to look at one of these 6-year-olds incorrectly and they'll die. So
Right.
Definitely the irony. And I think that's pretty clear, or I think that's a pretty clear trope in progression fantasy books or progression focused books, because you have to get stronger. That's the whole genre,
For somebody like Lyndon, he will undoubtedly progress farther than people who are taking it slow and steady. They know that they have a soul. They know that they have a path, and they're working towards becoming whatever the hell they need to be. Like for his clan, I think Jade is as far as it goes. And so they're on a steady path. But for Lyndon, he's forced, because the stakes are higher for him, he's forced to do double, triple the work. So it's natural that he will advance beyond them eventually.
That reminds me of a quote. So being forced to advance or being at odds or back against the wall as your position, in my opinion, and I think I've kind of alluded to this, maybe even spoken about directly, that is the best place to grow because you don't have an option. And the quote that it reminds me of is Sun Tzu in The Art of War has this concept of death ground, where soldiers have no option but to fight for survival, because it actually taps into something a little more primal than they initially do, because it's like, well, there is no other option. The option is survive. And when you get something, when you boil down your existence to, if I don't do this task, I'm going to die, most the time you can tap into I guess I'd call it levels of the subconscious that are there, but are not accessible from a conscious realm, you push forward. He says in one spot, when you are on death ground, you fight. And another spot, he encourages generals, throw your soldiers into positions from which there is no escape, and they will prefer death to fight. If they face death, there's nothing they may not achieve. If they survive this death ground, they will be so elated with their achievement that they overcame. It will actually create even more of a drive, a stronger fire within them. And I think we see this in Lyndon's life. I don't know if I can give Will Wight credit for like thinking ahead and like doing this. It truly just unfolded for Lyndon in his character arc that Will wrote as he was dreaming up this storyline.
If you think about the soldiers that were dropped in the Western Front in World War I, the trench warfare,
Mm-hmm.
I think the ones that survived, that wasn't about the cause, if you will. I think it
Yeah.
was, I just need to survive. Now, you can fast forward to World War II, and there was definitely more of a cause to the fighting for the Allies, and there was like this honor and the right thing to do mentality. If I think about some of the Americans who were fighting in the Indo-Pacific, in the jungles, yeah, maybe they joined because they wanted to stop Russia and Germany at that point, more specifically, and the Japanese. In the thick of it, I don't think anybody's, remembering the speech that their general gave before they landed, right? They're
Right.
thinking about survival. So the gamut of that experience, whether it's just pure survival because you were just conscripted and thrown into the Western Front, or you joined up because you have a sense of duty and honor to fight for your country or to get revenge against the Japanese, whatever that looks like for the individual. In the thick of the fight, it's only survival.
Yeah. There's one more example that comes to mind, and I think it was in Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Strategy, 38 Laws of Strategy. I'm trying to remember how many strategy. I can't remember the name of the book at the moment, but he gives this example of I want to say it was the Spanish conquistadors. Sorry, it's 33 Strategies of War, I believe is what it's called. He's got numbers in a lot of his books. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
33 Strategies of War. Yes, I'm correct. Okay. He talks about the Spanish conquistadors when they landed in Latin America, and I think it was Cuba specifically, actually, or it could have been, well, it doesn't matter. They landed somewhere, and I want to say the leader of the expedition was Vasquez, maybe, and he was having trouble with his soldiers and subordinates not really committing to the cause of the conquering that they had set out for, and so his decision, and Green kind of unpacks this, and he quotes Sun Tzu's Death Ground, is one night Vasquez went and burned the boats. There's no going home. We're here. That's it. And
Yeah.
that actually changed the tide for the motivation for his soldiers. They were not happy, understandably so, because it's like, okay, now you're just here to survive or you'll die here. There is no going home. It's just moving forward. There's a quote behind me that I think of often from Dalinar from Stormlight Archives, because you were talking about it a minute ago. The most important step a man can take is the next one. It's always the next one. And that's the same thing to me as Death Ground, where it's like you have, oh, actually, I'm thinking of two different quotes. The one behind me is if I must fall, I will rise a better man. But the concept is the same. I will rise each time a better man. Actually, to get it right, I'm going to get hate mail comments. It's this idea of like, you have to move forward. Time is ever moving forward. At the end of the day, 4 years are going to go by and you're going to be 4 years older. So you can either do something today to make that self of 4 years from now have more skills or more talent or whatever, or you can burn 4 years of comfort, which a lot of people do, and they're like older and they have nothing to show for it. All that to say, I somehow started with irony and ended on Sun Tzu and Robert Greene, and I've gotten lost on a side quest and need a little help.
Well, that's fine. I think this is a perfect time to move on. But if you guys are enjoying this side quest, you can show your support by sharing this episode with a fellow book-loving friend. Because, Jonathan, I think this is your quote, every journey is better with friends.
Let's keep this casual book club growing to maybe use a little Lord of the Rings language. Let's make the fellowship bigger. How about that?
There you go. I like it. I like it. So thanks for listening, but let's dive back into today's quest. Another choice for the dealer, also known as Jonathan, because he hates being called John. Just in case anybody wants to comment, always add Jonathan, otherwise he will find you and complain.
I'll treat you like Charity treats Lyndon.
That's right. Let's talk about like a big event from our perspective. Like what's a thing that happened in the book that was, how do I say this? That was, the thought that came to me was like that was monumental in your enjoyment, but that sounds so pretentious. Just an event in the book.
Yeah, this is a casual book club, Slava. No pretentiousness here, except for me quoting Sun Tzu and Robert Greene.
What's an event that's worthy of a main quest for us?
Some of the stuff that I always like is kind of scratching under the surface. I love the moment we talked about earlier where Orthos leaves the group, which was super sad. Then we get the reveal near the end of the book where he ends up going to find Wight, Lyndon's sister, and we're like, oh man, this is great. He's going to help her out. And we also see that there's a bunch of turmoil in Sacred Valley now. And it's just a reminder because we've been so far away from Sacred Valley for basically book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, and book 6. We haven't even really talked about Sacred Valley. There have been like a couple little moments here and there, but this to me is like a quick reminder of like, hey, this all started from Sacred Valley. Lyndon still cares about his family, even though they were terrible to him. Orthos, because they have a soul contract, knows that, and so he goes to basically help pave the way, and maybe he'll train Wight to become an Underlord.
Ooh,
who knows?
Interesting. For me, it was definitely Yeren's Lifeline crisis and her need to reach Underlord, where she almost dies in the book. To me, that is the one that stands out. So Yeren's severe injury, which damages her lifeline, she's forced to confront her mortality. To save herself, she must advance to Underlord. And this is a process that requires not only strength, but personal insight to resolve itself, which is the whole shtick to this genre. I think why it's important and why it stood out to me, it encapsulates this series' emphasis on inner growth as a requirement for advancement and cultivation. This point in the book, although I mentioned her growing in her affections for Lyndon and her growing as a person in previous books, this is a turning point that pushes her to reconcile her fear of isolation, the fear of losing Lyndon. Coming to grips with her mortality, I think, adds more depth to her motivations. It's a part of the book that I had an emotional response to. I was like, oh, wow. Is this what Jonathan meant when he said that Yeren might leave in a couple of books? That bastard told me she was going to leave, and what he meant was she's dead. So this moment in the book and in the series as a whole is where I had a very strong emotional response. Her quest to reach Underlord, I kind of saw as a parallel to her desire to remain close to Lyndon and maintain their shared path. Or maybe it's the reversed, where because she wants to remain with Lyndon, she doesn't want to be alone, and she has loved the journey so far. She feels a connection to this group, this motley crew, if you will. And so she has this desire to survive, just like we talked about a few minutes ago. And to me, that event by itself stood out from everything else. I thought that was a fantastic portion of the story. I think I mentioned this last episode, but it's worth mentioning again because this is the thing for me in this book that was the most fun to read.
Can you dive into that and unpack it a little more for us? Like, why was this so touching for you? What is it about her that you really attach to as a reminder? And then how do you think that this plays out on a global scale in terms of like, we see Ethan bring her specific cultivated food to try to help, when this struggle's going on. Do you think that this will be something that Mercy can help with later?
The first part is easy to answer. I identify with Yeren because of her spunk. She's sarcastic, she's spunky, she's able to survive on her own. She's kind of made her own path. She doesn't really give a crap about what people think about her. She has a goal in mind and she goes for it. And that is how I see myself. My life has not been easy, and this is not a therapy session. I'm not going to bore people with
It
my
might become
story.
one.
Maybe those listeners who have been with us from the beginning know a little bit about my life. And the reason I think I was able to survive my childhood was because I came with an FU attitude. Some people fight, some people you flight, some people, kind of fall into themselves. Some people go into insane coping mechanisms. And by that, I mean that they do drugs or they live, a life that's self-destructive, which often includes drugs. But for me, Yeren's persistence in her survival and her resolve, that's what I resonate with, because I feel as I look back on my life, that's the only thing, the FU attitude, and I just got to do what I have to do. I have to get to the next point in my life, whether it's leaving the house, whether it's finding a job that allows me to leave the house and allows me to leave the chaos and the abuse. That drive, accompanied with the sarcasm and, kind of grumpiness of Yeren that I love, that's what attaches me to her.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she's dying, or I think she might die, that evoked that emotional response.
Yeah, that's good.
To your second question, if you can restate it, how does her survival impact the rest of the story?
Yeah, what do you think that her survival, both in terms of like her friends trying to help her, and do you think that there's still a weakness that resolves even though she got to Underlord at the end of the book that she'll need to? Because there's two things that are going. She's got a multi-stage struggle. Like, yes, she has a lifeline issue, but that was actually exacerbated by the fact that she has a blood shadow who's sucking on her lifeline anyway. And so, like, okay, she got to Underlord, but she still has a blood shadow issue.
Right.
So,
Okay. So two-part
there-
question, two-part
yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
The first part, I think, and we'll find out in book 7, but I think this is another step in her growth as a character. Because she saw her friends come together and try to help her survive, did help her survive, she will be more confident in their reciprocity and their loyalty towards her. So some of that fear that she has of being alone and losing people might be abated or satiated, not 100%, but I think this event where she saw her friends come together and rally around her will help her grow in that aspect. Now, the second part of the question about the blood shadow, yes, she's Underlord. She'll have more control of it, but I don't think, this is Slava guessing, I don't think book 7 or 8 maybe we'll see a resolution to that. There might be more control that she gets of her blood shadow. There might be a way that she maybe even gets rid of the blood shadow, but I don't think that's happening in the next book, despite how fast some of the character arcs and how fast some of the advancements for the characters happen in this book. I think that's one of those things that will keep with her for a while, because it'll always be like a crucible of testing, if I can use a fancy term,
Yeah.
for her, right? So that's my answer.
Interesting.
And you can correct me or guide me or confuse me, because you like to do that too.
No, that's fine. Was it last book that the blood shadow, Yeren's talking to it?
Yeah.
And she goes, blah, 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 blah. When I say bark, you bark. And then the blood shadow just replies with, woof. Is that last book?
I think so. It has to be last book. It wasn't the previous one.
Yeah, it wasn't this one, right? Yeah.
And it wasn't this one.
Okay. So it's just interesting, right? It's intriguing even would be a better way, where like the blood shadow, I think, is at this crossroads, I guess, where it feels like it could be a big ally, but Yeren sees it as an enemy. It could be an ally, or it could be maybe just biding its time to take revenge on Yeren and take
Yeah.
her lifeline. So it's kind of, to me, also a teetering between life and death moment. Less now because she's an Underlord, but it's still not dealt with. And also, Ethan hasn't really given her. I mean, he definitely gave her a gift that he was saving for her, but he hasn't really found a solution to help her solve the problem per se, which I think is a little surprising to us because Ethan kind of has an uncanny ability to get whatever he needs when he needs it within reason. Although within reason's probably like ironic because he's
He's not
Ethan.
reasonable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, yeah, Yeren, I excited to see what happens with her, especially as we start to see sort of a convergence between the personal struggles that each of these characters has had and the universal stakes that are growing with dread gods and monarchs getting involved and factions. Next book, Uncrowned King Tournament, is actually going to be another step in fulfillment from the original vision that Serial saw for the future that she showed Lyndon. Because we're going to see some of the clans or groups that Lyndon got to see. The Eight Cloud, or no, it's it's like the Rainbow Cloud Empire and the Eight Crew group clan. I'm slaughtering these names, but there's a bunch of them that he saw in book 1 in the vision that they will be at the tournament. We will finally get to see another step forward in terms of like, oh, we've seen these folks before, even though it's just in a very short paragraph future vision type ordeal.
Yeah. I'm all looking forward to that.
Backtracking a little bit, did you have any reactions when Ethan split the teams up where Lyndon and Mercy went off when they were in the Night Wheel Valley, and then he and Orthos and Yeren went off?
Not really. I just thought Ethan being Ethan, he has some sort of plan in place, and this is subterfuge or something like that. But I didn't react to it in the moment going like, "Ooh, what is this?" And I didn't think about it beyond, okay, well, that's Ethan. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I thought something might happen, but nothing like grand came to fruition, nothing extraordinary. So I was like, oh, okay, he split him up. That's just part of Ethan's little machinations. He's read Robert Greene's book on 33 rules of screwing with your team as you build them into monarchs. And there we go.
Fair enough. I thought you were going to say something about Mercy and Lyndon like finally holding hands or confessing their love for one another.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence as to my, Slava guesses.
Mm-hmm.
What happens between the three of them, romantically, Lyndon, Yeren, and Mercy. If I remember correctly, my prediction in the very beginning was that, and this is based again on you telling me that Yeren leaves, Lyndon would somehow fall for Mercy.
Mm-hmm.
But now that Mercy is back with her family, I don't see that as an immediate option unless he grows, advances, and somehow she falls for him, and then her mom has to be like, "Oh, come on," right? Like not this. I was trying to get revenge on this stupid kid, and now he's dating my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So I can kind of see that happening, but the little moment where Yeren is dying or almost dying, or maybe this was after she got better, where Lyndon sees her like half naked, and they both kind of have this like weird teenage reaction. I was like, okay, oh, maybe not Mercy.
That's all he needed was a little slip of the nip.
There you go. It's a 17-year-old boy or 20-year-old man, whatever. It's pretty much the same. 3 years don't make that much of a difference.
Especially when you're Lyndon.
So I'm still on the fence about my prediction here because I'm not reading ahead. I'm not doing any research like I've done with Stormlight Archives.
Mm-hmm.
This is solely book at a time. I'm waiting until the next book is in the schedule. And because of what I described a few minutes ago about me thinking in the moment that Yeren leaving is her dying, well, I know that's not the truth now. If you said it, it means she does leave at some point, like Orthos has left. Does she leave because of Mercy, or does she leave because the feelings for Lyndon are too strong? Who knows? So
she could also just fall into the trap that she is convinced. You know how some characters like become convinced of their own lies or beliefs, even
Yeah.
though that's not true for other people. They just act on them. That's another possibility.
Okay. I'm looking forward to what happens there. I know it's kind of silly, but I am actually looking forward to if there is a romantic arc between Lyndon and Yeren.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something where like, oh, they're young, they have these feelings, they don't know what to do with them, but eventually it just grows into a stronger and stronger friendship. Or it could be the friendship that it is now that grows into a romantic relationship. But as I say that, I'm not sure that's where Will Wight is going. Like, I just don't see that
Mhm.
being a main thing that happens. 6 books in, there's not a lot of romance that goes on. There's not a lot of those elements to this story like there are in other animes or other books of this genre, this nature.
Yeah.
Here it seems to be more about these guys and girls, this crew advancing
Right.
in the sacred arts. So,
Right.
as much as I think it's fun to speculate on that, probably not a big portion of the story or a big deal in the story.
Fair enough. That leads me to another question for you as we wind this episode down. Got any hot takes
Hot takes.
about literally anything? Yeren, Mercy, Lyndon, Athan, Orthos, Kelsa, the Uncrowned King tournament, the Dread Gods, the Akura clan, Dross.
You know, I can't think of any. Like a hot take. I had some hot takes from the previous books we read.
Oh, I know. And so does the audience.
And I think one of my hot takes has to do with something about the romantic relationship or lack thereof between Lyndon and Yeren and Mercy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of any.
One of my hot takes is I think that Will is going to have a big moment with Athan where he gets his comeuppance because he's never really gotten that yet. Now, granted, he did have a really difficult moment with Lyndon when he lost his arm in book 2 or 3. Other than that, Athan hasn't, even though he got, dethroned, I think that Wight is saving him, like saving a chess piece, right? Like, can't wait to play this. And I think we're all going to enjoy it, even though we like Athan.
I'll buy that.
We also don't really know if we can fully trust him because we're not sure what he's doing.
I mean, I don't think he's an enemy, but I think his machinations have caused problems, like with Lyndon losing his arm.
Yep.
He is so singularly focused that he doesn't think about these consequences, and he admits to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
2 books ago, I think. All right, I like your hot take. I'll second the motion for that hot take.
You second the motion.
Yeah.
All right. Well, bring some hot takes for later, for next episode when we have our guest episode, and we'll see what happens there.
Sounds good. But before we leave, Jonathan, let's rate the book. So our usual rating system, for those who don't know, is 1 through 5, 5 being perfect, 4 being was good, but I might change this, 1 being hot garbage. And we usually do world, characters, plot. So for me, this book was 5 across.
Same, 5 all across. But that leads me to a different question. And I picked this series. I love the world. I love the characters. I love the plot. I love the rising tension, bloopers at the end of the books. Man, it's so fun. Just a great time. But if you were to pick 3 words to describe the book, Slava, let's add to this little rating system. What 3 words would you use to describe the book? Where it's not a sentence, just 3 different words.
I would say emotional. Growth and struggle would be the 2 other words. Struggle because we get more of the internal struggle of Yeren, or specifically her fear of losing people. That's more profound in this book, I think. Growth because we do see both of them advance. We see both of them internally process their growth thus far. And I wouldn't be able to give you an example right now. But what I came away with after finishing the book, I was like, oh, wow, we got more in depth. We got a more clarity into the internal struggles of each character. And then we saw them, jump to Underlord. That sets them up in the next book to be more advanced as characters personally, too.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have to tell me your 3 words. I showed you mine. You show me yours.
It's a weird way to say that, but okay. I'd say ambitious. I think that Wight tried to tackle something pretty big here, bringing everyone up to Underlord, because the more powerful people get, the more difficult I think the writing gets. He's also setting up some sort of tournament next book, which is pretty cool, but also could be difficult to give us a good payoff with. Another one would be Intense. I think the book was pretty action-packed and difficult for the characters. Maybe even my third one is Unrelenting because of the pressure that Charity encourages other people to put on Lyndon. And it's not just Lyndon, right? It's Lyndon and his friends. They're just constantly being battered and beaten. So it'd be ambitious, intense, and unrelenting. So if you want a book that's ambitious, intense, and unrelenting, as well as
emotional and shows people struggling and growing out of those struggles.
What was your third one? That was 2.
No, emotional, growth, and struggles. Yep.
Right. Then this is the book. Give it a shot. I'm not sure it does really well as a standalone. I've never met someone who just read this book. I think you could still get into it, but I think there'd be a lot of questions.
I'd never recommend anybody to read any of these books as standalones. I would just challenge them to start with one and trudge through them if they really feel like it's going to be a trudge. But for me, this one sits at top 2 out of the series so far. I think even this would be the number 1 if I was really forced to think about it.
All right.
Well, what would you say? Was this like a favorite or this, it's one of the series and I like it, but there's one that really is worth waiting for or that it has come before?
I think it's top 5. Ghostwater, I think, is my favorite, and I think Black Flame's my second favorite.
Okay.
I think it sits in top 5 because it's kind of a pivotal moment, both for the team, for the individuals, and the world is transitioning. So, yeah, it's top 5.
And with that, I think we have landed this Flying Cloud Fortress of Solitude.
That's a lot of words. Too many words, Dross. Thanks for joining us, guys, but before you vanish back to reality from the Nightwheel Valley, drop us a quick review on your favorite podcast platform. It keeps our quest alive and helps other book lovers find their way here.
And take a moment to rate the show on your favorite podcast platform and share it with your book-loving friends. We'll see you next time on SideQuest.